Hi. To an account showcase. I realized that, especially like on the YouTube side, I never really talked about like the current state of my account, the kind of stuff that I have on my account that I went for, whether or not I regret or am glad I went for the stuff that I did. And so I figured that I could do an account showcase to basically just show like what the current state of my account is, talk about the mistakes that I've made in the account progression, talk about what I'd do different if I started a new account, as well as just using the opportunity to flex a few good artifacts. So I have, in terms of 5-star weapons, I have Elegy, Skyward Harp, Lost Prayers, Jadewing Spear, Aquila, and also Aquila. My first Aquila I got from the weapon banner. I mean, it was when the game first came out, right? I think it was the first weapon banner, but the first 5-star I ended up getting was Jean, and then I got the Aquila to like go with that basically, because at that point I didn't know that much about the game, but I was like, yo, that's the Knights of Favonius 5-star weapon, and Jean is the acting Grandmaster of the Knights of Favonius. Yo! But yeah, Elegy was actually an accident. When Elegy came out was also at the same time as Ali Flash came out. And at the time, I had started content creation somewhat seriously, and I wanted to get an Ali Flash to be able to do some like 4-star weapon Bennett testing. And also, I'm pretty sure I was still a Bennett main at the time. So I kind of wanted the Ali Flash, and I ended up trying to go for it. And then after like one 10-pull, I realized, wait, no, this is a bad idea. But I got Elegy on that 10-pull, so it's hard to say what I feel about it nowadays, because it's like, yeah, if you can get a guaranteed Elegy in a 10-pull, it's worth your like 1600 primos. But would I recommend actually pulling on the weapon banner for it? It's a good like second choice to have if the other weapon that's on the banner is one you want, but it's not important unless you start doing like speedrunning. It's never really like an important thing. To me, it basically functions as like a second fav that I just put on Venti and just leave there like forever basically. Every once in a while it goes onto a different character when I try to do like Amber Hu Tao speedruns or something like that. Sometimes it goes on Yelan now. It wouldn't have changed much to my account's progression if I didn't have the Elegy, so it's not something that like was really all that impactful. So I have R4 Viridescent Hunt, R1 Serpent Spine, and R1 Deathmatch. I don't have a Black Sword and I don't have a Solar Pearl. I bought the Battle Pass, I think, when the game started, and I stopped after 6 because I kind of realized that I wasn't getting enough out of it to justify it. And then later on I stopped getting Welkin as well. The Viridescent Hunt refines are a very questionable thing in general. Viridescent Hunt is one of those weapons where refines on it reduces the cooldown on the passive, right? It's in blue, right? In the text, which means that it gets changed through refines. At refine 5, it becomes 10. At refine 1, it's 14. It's not that significant, but if you end up being able to get 2 procs of it instead of 1, I mean, it's worth the refines in terms of like if you are already getting the battle pass. Honestly, the reason why I got it to R4 is basically because I didn't think I was gonna like stop getting the battle pass at the time, and I thought I'd get it to R5 and then get the other weapons. If I could do it over, I'd probably get Solar Pearl and Black Sword instead of 2 of the refines, just because it would have been nice to have one of each just for testing purposes and shit like that. But I don't generally recommend Viridescent Hunt refines, but I don't generally recommend Battle Pass refines in general. I think if you have all of the Battle Pass weapons, the only real reason to consider to continue getting the Battle Pass is because the Mora and the Hero's Wits, I guess the weapon experience that you get out of it, you consider that to be worth it. Otherwise, I just don't think it's very worthwhile. And it's why I stopped, because I didn't think it was worth it for me. Now, moving on to non-Battle Pass weapons. So, I have a lot of catalysts, apparently. I have R5 Sac Frag, and I have another one here. Same for Witsith, same for Favonius. At like unleveled, I've got the EI event weapon, Oath Sworn Eye. Got a Hakushin that I need to get to R5 eventually. I've got Dodoko, Eye of Perception, Prototype Ember. If you're wondering, by the way, why my event weapons are R1, it's just because I haven't, like, I have the materials to refine them, I just haven't because I'm not using them. And it costs, like, what, 15,000 Mora to get them to R5? Like, it's not like these have an expiration date, so it's not like I need that. But yeah, I've got an R5 Fab Lance, and I also have an R2 Fav Lance. Part of me wishes that I had two R1 Fav Lances instead of this R2, but it is what it is. Crescent Pike, R5. I did it for Zhongli. Played a lot of physical Zhongli when he came out and for a while after. Zhongli's basically like, he's a physical carry, but instead of being a hyper carry, he's very, very like self-sufficient for his own damage. And you can kind of just play good supports with him if you play him like on field. Dragon's Bane, R5 level 90. 5 Great Sword, R5. Spindle is one of the few event weapons that I actually leveled and invested into properly because it is actually very good on Albedo. Blacklift Longsword is the only Blacklift weapon that I have. The reason I got it is that I didn't have enough good swords at the time. Even to this day, I don't have a good sword option other than Blacklift for my Kea. Unironically, like, I don't really regret getting it. I've talked about Blacklift weapons a little bit a pretty long time ago. I think it was in the second Ask the Jeff, where I think that the only two Blacklift weapons that are worth considering are the longsword and the polearm. Because basically your other options for swords and polearm aren't always that great through blacksmith and potentially gacha. Amenoma has obviously made that less the case for Blacklift because it's still at least pretty good, like pretty decent on a bunch of the characters that were like Blacklift, but yeah. Have an Iron Sting, R1. Reason it's still R1 is because I don't see a real reason to get it refined. I only really ever use it on Kazuha, and I don't even use it on Kazuha that often. It's basically only when I'm playing double animo with Kazuha. The refines on it don't help his swirls, and he's building full EM, so it's like not that worth getting refines on it. Lion's Roar R5 that actually got somewhat recently. Sack Sword R5, which honestly, like if I could trade this R5 Sack Sword for an R1 Fav Sword, I would do it 100%. One of my biggest regrets on my account is refining my Fav Sword. Basically, almost no matter what team combinations I use, I almost always end up with 2, sometimes 3, sometimes even 4 characters that want Fav Sword. And so I wish I had 3 R1 Fav Swords instead of 1 R3 Fav Sword. Right? I refined them a very, very long time ago before I started getting into theory crafting very seriously. And I just haven't gotten any more since. I keep getting some fucking Fav Greatsword. I have 2 R5 ones and an R1. Keep getting some catalysts and some bows, but no swords. I just can't get swords. That's kind of the reality of weapons. You can never really guarantee that you get the 4-star one you want, which is why I think that comparing using like free-to-play like guaranteed options is very, very important in weapon sheets. When I do sheets on like weapon comparisons, I basically always use the best guaranteed free-to-play option as the benchmark. So usually I'll have like a column in my sheets where it's like percentage of whatever, right? And that whatever is generally going to be the best like free-to-play guaranteed weapon. After that, it starts getting into the weapons that I haven't fully leveled yet. Archaic, which I haven't used in a long ass time. Rain Slasher, that I don't use. Stringless, which I should level, but I'm lazy, and I think that farming for weapons is boring, so I don't. Same for Favonius Warbow. Same for Sapwood Blade. And I guess same for the second Fav Lance. When it comes to my weapons, there's also like a bunch of them that I don't use and I don't level. I don't level Rust. I think Rust is a shit weapon. It would actually be fine on Yoimiya, and I do have Yoimiya on my account. It's not better enough. I have a Scoured Harp, so I just don't think it's worth the resin to level up my Rust. Like, it's not enough of an upgrade. Especially because it's not even R5, it's R4. But yeah, we'll get into why I have Yoimiya later, don't worry. I never really pulled on weapon banners. I pulled, like I said, at the very, 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 very beginning of the game on the Aquila banner, the very first one. And I pulled like 10 or 20 wishes on the Elegy banner, the first one, because I was trying to get Ali Flash. I think both were a bad decision. Even if I got lucky and I got 5 stars, like if I was put in the same situation again, I wouldn't wish on them. I got lucky, which mitigated the mistake, but I do think that pulling on the banners was a mistake. I say that not because 5-star weapons are bad, but rather because personally, I don't enjoy the game more from doing bigger numbers. I enjoy the game more from having different teams that I can make work. Because of that, I think that if you have that mindset, it's so much better to pull for new characters than it is to pull for weapons, because weapons just don't change your playstyle. Anyways, let's get into the characters. Let's start with the characters I don't have. Wanderer, didn't pull for him. Did a bunch of testing on him. A bunch of different accounts. I didn't enjoy a single one of them, so that kind of cemented my decision not to go for him. I wouldn't mind getting Lila, but I'm not going to wish on a banner just for her. I'll get her eventually. Didn't pull for Nilo because, I mean, I talked about Nilo a little bit. I think that her kit is pretty boring, and I don't like the design of it, right? I think that the way that they went about giving her, like, bloom stuff was unnecessarily restrictive, and I just think that's bad design. They could have had Nilo's passive activate even if you have a Geo unit on your team, right? Or even an Electro unit on your team. Like, just have her passive make it so that the cores, they become bountiful cores and they can't get hyper bloomed just all the time, which means that you can put an Electro unit on your team just because they synergize well with the units on your team, or an Animal unit, or a Pyro unit, or whatever unit, and still have a bountiful bloom team. I think that the restriction to only Hydro and Dendro is unnecessarily restrictive, and in the sense that, like, it didn't need to be there for her to be a bloom unit, and because not everyone has the good Hydro and Dendro units, it's kind of just like, hey, we gave her a passive so that she only works with these units. By the way, do you have $200 for these units? I think it's scummy design, basically. And I think she could have been a lot more fun without that restriction. Because of that, I ended up not pulling for her. I think she's a good unit, and like, if they manage to make her kit so that like her only good teams are Hydro and Dendro, but it doesn't feel like it's the restrictions are like artificially just put there to make you spend money, then I might have pulled for her. Because, I mean, I ended up pulling for her on my free-to-play for like testing purposes, but like I could have potentially rolled for her if I just didn't get like, if I didn't feel like her kit was a whale bait. I figured that I'll get him one day eventually, maybe 3 years from now, but one day. So no real reason to go for his banner. Hazel, I thought was a pretty boring unit. Yeah, I didn't go for because I think that her E is frustrating to use. Before Dendro, she was kind of just a slight grade to Beidou that was better in single target and worse in AoE. Now with Dendro, she's kind of like a slight upgrade to a bunch of the on-field Electro units and aggravate teams. Dendro didn't fix the main issue that I had with her kit, which is basically just that it feels frustrating to be forced to stay on her for 3 seconds and use a thing that leaves you vulnerable and that you can just get fucking slapped out of multiple times per rotation, and I don't like it. Shenhe, I didn't pull for her because I didn't have cryo units I cared about enough for it. Ito, I tried to pull for him for a little bit. I lost the 50-50 and I was like, you know what? If I go for Ito now, I'll lose my like guaranteed, and I don't have enough Primogens to really, at the time I had like 20,000 Primogens or something. I might find myself in a situation where I need to spend money to get a unit I want for my account, and I don't want to put myself in that situation. And while Ito looks pretty fun and all, I don't think he's fun enough to justify that. On top of that, I didn't have C6 Goro. I still don't. So I was like, eh. Kokomi I didn't get because I thought she was boring, and I kind of still do. I knew she was good, right? I remember when she initially came out, I talked about how Kokomi was kind of just Barbara 2.0, but people underestimated and still underestimate Barbara. But I ended up not going for her because it's just, I didn't find her kit to be interesting, really. Ayaka I didn't get because I didn't care for her. Ayla I didn't get because when I tested her, she felt really bad. Ganyu I didn't get because I think charge shots are boring as fuck. Klee I didn't get because I think that doing damage is fun. No, but I didn't get her because I didn't like her playstyle. I thought her playstyle was a little bit boring. And Chi-Chi I didn't get because I haven't lost 50-50 to her yet. Wonder if I'll get Tefnati or Chi-Chi first. We'll see. Honestly, realistically, I probably have a Chi-Chi hidden in there. Okay. That's it for the units I don't have. Let's not go through the units I do have. So, Keqing is the standard unit I use the most now. I basically just used her like 3 times before Dendro came out. I thought her kit was not fun. The main issue that I had with her kit was basically that I don't like charge attack spam. I think it's kind of boring. And before Dendro, it was actually pretty hard to play her TF. Because in order to keep triggering electro reactions with Keqing, you would basically need to play her in an electro charge team. And then in an electro charge team, you need to keep doing a bunch of normal attacks if you're using Xingqiu, and you'd just be in pain if you're using anyone else because Xingqiu is just so much better. And then you just be like, okay, well, if I need to keep using my normal attacks, and I don't want to spam my E and my burst because, well, shit, dude, the animations for that is pretty long, actually. I thought that Keqing in Electrocharge teams felt pretty bad and wasn't very fun. And with the release of Dendro with Aggravate, you don't need to maintain an aura anymore, which made her a lot more fun to play with TF. And I mean, we'll get to my TF set a little bit later into the video, but I've actually been enjoying playing Keqing now. But yeah, none of her constellations really matter that much. In Aggravate, on Keqing specifically, she actually has a lot of electro application, to the point where EM Sends and Attack Sends are kind of interchangeable on her. That actually means that if you go EM Sends, right, the value of your constellations isn't that significant, because you don't have that much attack. So unironically, like, the difference between my Keqing and a C0 Keqing is very minor, right? This doesn't have separate ICD with the E-Cast. It shares ICD with the E-Cast, so it basically doesn't do anything. This, they actually bug fixed recently. The thing about it is, you basically always play Keqing with Fischl if you play her in Aggravate, and with Fischl and Keqing, you already have enough energy recharge. Like, you don't need more energy. If anything, her C2, and the bug fix on her C2 in Aggravate teams is a nerf to her, because it means that you'll get back full energy more quickly, but it doesn't really help you because you would get back full energy anyways, but getting it more quickly means that if you're using Mist Splitter, you'll lose your stack. It helps a little bit with like your DMC if you use them, and your Kazuha if you use them, particle generations and like energy requirements, but not significantly. And then we got burst levels, which are nice, but not like necessary. C6 Fischl. I actually only got C6 relatively recently. I started singing Fischl's praises long before I had C6, because even without the C6, she was very, very useful for my account. I have C1 Zhongli. The first Zhongli was intentional. I got him the first time he came around because I thought his character was pretty cool and I thought his animations looked nice, but I pretty quickly benched him. And nowadays, I basically only really use him when the Abyss is fucking cringe and has Wolflord in it. I used him as a physical carry for a while, but I don't really do that all that much anymore because it's run its course. I kind of got bored of it. But yeah, I'm definitely not like the target audience for Zhongli. Zhongli's a character for people who don't like the combat system or who don't like having to learn enemy attack patterns. So he's one of the characters that I regret wishing for the most. And then the second one, the C1, I got him accidentally when I was trying to go for Yanfei. I was trying to go for Yanfei because I wanted to do some testing on her, and then I got him and I got mad. Nahida, I'm pretty glad I got her. She doesn't really open up any new teams, and honestly, she doesn't really open up any teams where DMC wouldn't be able to work. But she does work a lot better than DMC in a lot of the teams. And more importantly, now I can play Dendro teams on both sides, which was pretty nice, without having to play Collei, which I really do not like. Yeah, I guess she opened up some burning teams where DMC would be kind of shit, but yeah. Kazuha is another one of the units that I'm pretty happy that I got. Unlike Nahida versus DMC, he isn't just like, wow, massive upgrade over Sucrose, right? He's an upgrade in some teams and a downgrade in others, but it's the dynamic is similar in the sense that it lets you play a Sucrose or Kazuha on each side. And I do that pretty often. Xiao, so some people might be surprised by this, but I don't regret pulling for Xiao at all. Xiao is, I mean, I pulled for him on his first banner, and I don't use Xiao that often, and I never really did use him that often, but I use him in almost every combat event that's like meant to be challenging. I'll end up using Xiao, because Xiao has a lot of things that like you don't necessarily notice at first that make him perform very well in a bunch of the events, right? When you're fighting multi-wave enemies, the fact that his damage isn't really reliant on getting your Kazuha on field to swirl a thing means that he can deal with multiple waves of enemies somewhat easily. I don't use him too often anymore, and I don't think I'll ever really use him in Abyss seriously ever again. I'll use him every once in a while, but I'll never do it because, like, in a situation where I'm like, okay, well, I just want to get this Abyss done and then move on to something else, right? But I do use him in events, and I'm kind of glad I have him on my account. Yeah, like, he's not the only character that can do that, but out of the characters that are, like, kind of designed for that kind of stuff, he's the one that I find the most fun. So I ended up going for him, and yeah, that's that. Venti, also definitely don't regret getting him. I think the least fun thing in the game, by far, is when you have more than enough DPS to clear a chamber, but because the enemies spawn far away from each other, either it'll take you 2 minutes to clear a chamber in floor 9 just because the enemies keep spawning way too far away from each other, or you'll actually struggle with well-invested units in floor 12 just because they're so fucking far away from each other. Because it just feels bad when you spend your uptime running between enemies and using up all of your stamina to run between enemies. And Venti basically single-handedly says, I understand, Zajef. I understand. Let me take care of your problem for you. All in all, Venti's existence has made so much of my cringe experiences less cringe and ugh. Raiden. Raiden is unironically, pre-Dendro, was one of the characters that I regretted getting the most. I ended up getting her because I expected Hoyoverse to release a bunch of units that work with her because she's an Archon. And then they kind of just didn't. And so I was just sitting there with a unit that I basically didn't use, that I pulled for to like be able to test future units that could potentially work with her. And I was just sitting there like with immense regret. She was basically benched. I still haven't leveled her talents to 9 because I didn't really use her. And then when they released Dendro, she just became like the best option for Hyperbloom. There are obviously alternatives if you don't have her, but at least she found a new life on my account on the 4-piece Gilded Dream set with her Dragon's Bane, and she stopped being benched. She went from probably the 5-star character I used the second least after Yoimiya to probably the 5-star character I used the most, or one of the most. Not much to say about DMC. Like it's not like I had to make a decision on whether or not to pull for them. Ayato, I ended up pulling for Ayato basically because he worked with TF, and I thought that was Pog. I mean, that's what it boils down to for a lot of these characters. I pulled for them because they worked with TF, and I thought that was cool. And I don't really regret it either. I think that Ayato is one of the characters that just works really well in so many teams that having him on your account, if you don't have a lot of the alternatives, kind of just fills up the gaps. I've had a lot of fun with him. Also, kind of became a character I used a lot more with the release of Dendro. And yeah, Yelan, obviously got her somewhat recently because she came out somewhat recently. Has been pretty fun. I also got her because I thought that she could be Pog with TF. She ended up not being that Pog with TF. Now I mostly use her in my Double Hydro Hyperbloom. I'd say I kind of have mixed feelings about about wishing for her. I don't like regret it because Double Hydro Hyperbloom is pretty fun and all, but I'm all like, I could do without her basically. If I'm choosing between her and Xingqiu, I'll choose Xingqiu literally every single time. But I guess it's nice to have like a cope Xingqiu as an option on the second side, and obviously Double Hydro is very strong. Sucrose, very useful. She effectively like doesn't really have constellations. Her C1 is a real constellation. The rest is like, it can be useful, but you get one more swirl. I guess that's cool. You get talent levels, but you're building EM, so it doesn't matter. You get more E's, but only if you stay on field with her, which most people don't do. Talent levels, which don't matter because you're building EM. And this is kind of fine in aggravate teams, but in basically all the other teams, it's very difficult to get it like reliably enough the element that you want, because the pickup range for her elemental absorption is very small on the like epicenter of her burst. So very often either you're gonna get the wrong element or you're just not gonna get an element at all, even if her burst is swirling. Kinda often feels pretty bad. So a lot of her constellations don't really do that much. I never really like wished for one of her constellations in particular. Getting her is nice, and that's kind of all you need. Yeah. We should talk about this, huh? Balls. Cool. So I got somewhat lucky with standard constellations for Kea, and I got him in the shop every time I could until I had him at C6. Honestly, I'm glad I did. Like, I don't think you should ever go standard banner for Kea, but when it comes to getting his constellations from the shop, I think that's pretty worthwhile if you plan on playing him. Because, yeah, It makes a pretty big difference. If I had to choose between, I think I got it 3 times from the shop. If I had to choose between getting him 3 times from the shop, which is what, 102 star glitter, or the 20 wishes you could get from 102 star glitter, I would definitely get him, like get him 3 times from the shop. Beidou! I got Beidou C6 somewhat early into my account. I don't use her as much now with the release of Dendro as I did before. I used her a lot before. Very, very, very often. I still use her, and I am glad I have her for a lot of the double electro hyper bloom stuff, because her burst doesn't hit seeds, which means that it lets you have 2 electro units without sharing ownership of hyper bloom between the 2. But yeah, Razor's cons don't do much. I'm kind of glad I have him just in general, because Thundering Fury is fun as fuck, but none of his cons like do that much. I mean, I guess I don't really need to talk about the 4 stars too much. I guess I can just like show which ones I have full cons and not. Thoma's C6 doesn't really do much for me, so I don't think I'll ever like intentionally try to go for it. I have activated my Bennett C6 because the only teams that it currently fucks over are not teams that I use too much. Some part of me regrets it because it makes it a lot harder to play TF Bennett, but I guess that's the sacrifice I must make. I have C2 Collei. Honestly, I don't care about any of her other constellations. The C2 is kind of the only one I care about. C4 is like nice to have, but meh. And then her C6 can be good like in Bloom teams, but in Aggravate teams, it can actually potentially fuck over your swirl setups. So you're gonna have to change your swirl setups if you have C6, because you're playing Dendro twice in a row, which is gonna prevent you from having Electro on the enemy. Albedo. I didn't wish for Albedo like for Albedo. I just wanted Bennett cons back then. And I have used Albedo like enough since for him to have been like a fine addition to my account, but yeah. Jean, obviously standard. Didn't like, never intentionally went for her. Jean was my first 5-star. And Jean's Constellation 1 was my second 5-star, right? I got her on the standard banner, and I got her on the Venti banner, which kind of sucked, but it is what it is. I haven't gotten a single Jean since. Cyno is one of my biggest regrets on the account. I pulled for him because of TF, right? TF set is just too fun, and I was like, whoa, they made a carry that's like made to work with TF Pog. And then I played him, and I wasn't that fun, and I kind of realized that Keqing was more fun with TF now. And then I also kind of realized that, oh yeah, I actually don't like him very much. When I did his story quest, I thought that his story quest made him look like a fucking quote-unquote justice-obsessed fucker who like wanted to punish people for doing inoffensive things. And I don't know, it made me dislike him quite a bit. Child is one of the characters that I did not mean to get. I got Child on his first run, and the reason why I got him is because I got a standard wish from, I think it was the Battle Pass, and then I pressed F3, and I wished. And I forgot to change the banner. And so I wished on Child's banner, and I got Child. And I got angry because I had now wasted my pity and wouldn't be able to get Zhongli, which I wanted to get. Looking back on it, it was a blessing in disguise because between the two, now, I would much rather have Child on my account than Zhongli. But yeah. Hu Tao! I ended up getting her on her rerun basically just so I could shit talk her. I had shit talked Hu Tao a lot before I got her because she's a good unit, but if you don't have Child on your account, or I guess at the time if you didn't have Child on your account, then pulling for Hu Tao kind of meant that you were more or less forced to bench your Xiangling, at the very least your vape Xiangling, because you would be using your Xingqiu and you wouldn't be able to use that with Xiangling anymore. And I don't think that Hu Tao is enough of an upgrade over Xiangling in single target to really justify it, especially considering how much of a downgrade she can be in AoE. Now, because we have a bunch more Hydro units, it's easier to be able to play both, which means that I don't dislike her as much anymore. And also, with the release of a bunch of the other units, right, we got like Kazuha that made mono pyro teams better with Xiangling. You know have a bunch more like Xiangling options. And you also have some more viable non-Xiangling options for free-to-play players with the release of Dendro. But yeah. All of this to say, I don't dislike her as much as I used to. But yeah, the main reason I ended up wishing for her on her rerun is so that when I said, yeah, I don't think she's like enough of an upgrade, I'd be speaking from the perspective of a triple crowned Hu Tao with pretty good artifacts doing like pretty good cancels. So I practiced a lot just so I could shit talk her basically. I'm a dedicated hater. Yeah, I hate triple crown her. I still use her every once in a while when I get bored of Hyper Bloom, I guess, or when I need Nahida on the other side. Not much to say about Galuk. I got him, I guess. He exists. I don't have too many cons on Yunzin. Would kinda like to get her C3, but I don't care about it that much. I got C1 on Furazan. I actually wanted to get C1 on Furazan. I play TF Furazan a lot now. If you swirl Electro onto enemies that are quickened, then it's gonna trigger Aggravate and it can prong the TF set. And then if you have her C1, you can use E and then charge attack, and then charge attack, and then E, and then charge attack, and then charge attack, and then E, and then charge attack, and then charge attack. And I think it's pretty fun. Sayu, I just don't care. Rosaria, I got her C2 a very long time ago. Haven't gotten any since. I don't really care about the rest of her constellations though. Lisa, kind of wish I started getting her from the shop earlier, because her C4 is something I would kind of like to have, but it doesn't matter that much. Xinyan is generally one of the on-fielders that I use for Mono Pyro. I just built her Pyro with C6 Bennett. Boy, Yoimiya. I got Yoimiya the same way I got C1 Zhongli, which was I wanted the 4-star on banner, and I wished, and then I got the 5-star, and then I molded. I very much regret getting her. I don't really ever use her. I don't find her fun. I don't find her teams cool. Her clear times are worse than my other choices. I just don't like it at all. Mona, have C1, whatever. Please, Hoyoverse, fix the C1. Make the frozen duration extended by 15% thing work, instead of it literally just being a lie. And before you start saying, no, you just have to do it in a specific order, no, that's not true. Like, that's just wrong. The order of application does impact freeze duration, but it does that without this. It's because of gauge theory. I have C6 Noelle, which... Noelle is a character that I do want to build eventually. I only got her C6 somewhat recently, so I haven't gotten around to it yet, but yeah. Diona. Kandaka is a character that, like, once I get her C6, I'll probably build her. Before that, I probably won't. She's at, like, level 70 right now, but I don't know. And Faye got her C4 this banner, or the last banner. I got her C4 recently. Her C4 is actually kind of useful, because it lets you do tank Faye. Kind of useful sometimes, so I might actually level her up properly. Amber, somehow I have C4. I never got her from the shop, and I don't think I'll ever get her from the shop. I guess at this point, this would be fine, but like, Chongyun C6, cool, I guess. Kuki also got her C4 very recently. The rest of her constellations are shit, so that's pretty good. Goro, we're on the way to C6 one day, perhaps. Sarah, I don't care about her constellations, because even if I had her at C6, I wouldn't use her. Alright, so that does it for the characters. One thing that you might have noticed is I don't really go for character constellations when it comes to 5-star units, because I just don't think they're fun. If a character's constellation is fun enough to change their gameplay, usually it's like the fucking C6. And that's way too expensive to justify it. Now, I guess we can just very, very quickly give a little bit of a rundown for exploration progress and shit like that. Most of my stuff is like somewhere between 80 and 100. I never really got around to chest hunting in any areas specifically, because I just think it doesn't make for all that interesting stream content, and I don't really play much off stream, so I kind of just procrastinate on it. There's a few islands here that I really didn't get much on, like this one. And what that's to me. But the main reason is that for Inazuma, I got 100% on like, I think almost every... It was every island, and then they released Tsurumi, I think. But I got 100% on almost all of Inazuma on my free-to-play account, because when Inazuma came out is when I started my free-to-play account, more or less. Like, it was around the same time. And so I just did it because I needed the AR experience to level up. And then I got to doing it on this account, and I was like, I don't want to do this again, dude. It's not fun enough. It's way too boring. So I still haven't gotten around to it. Maybe I'll do it one day, but honestly, I don't think so. Same thing for a lot of the quests, right? I ended up doing most of the character quests now, but for the longest time, like my story quests were just full, because I'd done most of them on my free-to-play account to level up my AR. And I just didn't want to do them again. Yai, I've done on my free-to-play, so I don't want to do it again. Yelan and Nahida are just recent enough that I just haven't gotten around to them yet. And yeah, I have a bunch of world quests. I still haven't finished the Tara Tales, right? A lot of the Inazuma stuff. I don't think I've got much left in Liva and Mondstadt. Let's move on to, I guess, a summary of like how I've spent my resin so far. At the very, very top, we have what I've been doing recently, which is farming for the flop set. Right, the Flowers of Paradise Lost, or Flowers Lost of Paradise. Flop, true, flop. I got a Sands, I got a Circlet, now all I'm missing is a Goblet. I also have this, I guess, but... Before that, I was basically only farming the artifacts we got with Sumeru, so Gilded and Deepwood. I have 44 plus 20 artifacts from Gilded or Deepwood. Some of them probably could be used as fodder, but a bunch of them are pretty good, right? Look at this, it's pretty fucking solid. We look at this, that's pretty solid. We look at this, that's pretty solid. But yeah, since the release of 3.0, most of my time has been spent farming the Gilded Dreams and Deepwood domain, and then since the release of the newest set, that's what I've been doing. Before that, I spent a decent amount of time in Emblem, although honestly I could have spent more time there. I spent a decent amount of time in this domain as well, just to get a good Albedo set. Spent a bit of time in the Tenacity domain. Back then it was to use on Fischl because it was before Dendro, and Tenacity is a pretty good set on her outside of Dendro teams. I have a decent amount of Noblesse, but honestly not as much as I should. I probably should have spent a bit more time with Noblesse. A little bit of Wish, decent amount of Thundering Fury as well, right? That's 35 plus 20 TF artifacts, most of which are somewhere between pretty good and kind of fucking insane, right? So we've got stuff that's like pretty good, right? Like this, it's like, okay, sure. And then we've got this stuff that's like kind of fucking insane, like this one, right? Hovers somewhere between those. TF is the set on which I have the most like leveled up artifacts, is the set that I've farmed the most, and it's the set that I strongbox when I do strongbox most of the time, because I think that it's a very fun set. Cooldown reduction isn't really a stat that you can get anywhere. There's a very, very rare things that give you ways of reducing your cooldowns, and TF is a cooldown reduction set. Right? It has a condition, you need to trigger electro reactions for it, but it does decrease cooldown. Most of the time that lets you do really fun shit that you can't do without it, and because of that, I like it a lot. It feels like you're breaking the game and you're doing something that's not intended to be a thing you can do, especially when you play him on units that are not electro. Decent bit of Wanderer pieces, just that I got from farming world bosses for a while. Decent bit of VV, just because I needed to get a bunch of EM sets, because I got tired of swapping between Kazuha and Sucrose all the time. So I have 1, 2, 3 EM goblets, only 1 EM hat, but 1, 2, 3 EM Sands. Got a decent amount of Glad leveled up for the same reason as Wanderer. A little bit of Lava Walker, a little bit of Thunder Soother, a little bit of Blizzard Trigger, but not too much, and then the rest is unleveled stuff. The rest of my resin, a lot of it was spent on leveling characters, because like I said earlier, the main way that I derive fun from this game is just by playing a bunch of different shit and varying the kind of teams I play. And so most of my characters are level 90. I have a few that are not, some of which I'm working on, some of which I'm not. The majority of them are level 90. A lot of resin went into that. A bunch of resin went into talents, right? Nothing crazy for a lot of them. But a decent amount. A lot of my talent stuff isn't actually properly optimized. Some of them are, like my Ayato, because I'm not intending on crowning him. And he's at level 9 on both of his relevant abilities, Yelan, stuff like that. But I still have a bunch of characters that, yeah, I also got my double crown Kea. But there's a bunch of characters that like have stuff that's not optimal, right? Like Beidou, no reason not to get her to level 12 on her E at this point, but I just find it boring to farm for talents. So stuff like that I very often just don't end up doing, right? Xingqiu's E, Guoba. This one's also just kind of kept like this because it's funny. Child is 8-8. He should be on 9-9, but I'm lazy. So with that out of the way, we can basically get into the character build. Usually I'll have my Yelan, depending on the team she's in, either on Fav, Elegy, or Stringless. Yelan is kind of my only character on which I really use Stringless, which is part of the reason why it's not leveled up. But if I put her on Fav, which is kind of the most common, I'll usually have her with this. So this is the set that she's usually on. We have 7 rolls, 8 rolls, 6 rolls, 4 rolls, 5 rolls, Decent set overall, ends up with a pretty solid ratio. If she's solo Hydro, very often this isn't going to be enough ER. So when that's the case, I use ER Sands instead, and it lets me go offset on generally the Goblet. Next up is my Xiangling. So Xiangling is almost always on Deathmatch. I haven't fished for the catch yet. I don't think I ever will, because fuck that shit. So I just use Deathmatch with generally ER Sands. Usually she uses one of these two. Most often it's this one. She is almost always on this Feather, which is one of the best artifacts I have on my account. This is just actually really good. Alright, it's a 9-roll Feather with all stats that you want to have on Xiangling. Usually she's using this Sands, this Goblet, this Circlet. Now this is a Circlet that doesn't have any crit substats, but it has 3 rolls of EM, 2 rolls of attack, and 1 roll of ER, which makes it unironically like an actual very good Circlet, even if it doesn't have any crit. So she ends up on around 64, 176, 211 ER. She's usually hovering around there. If I can get away with less ER because I have a bunch of Fabs on my team, I'll usually give her this EM Sands, get her to these stats, around 160 ER, or I'll give her this one, which has a bunch of EM substats, which makes it pretty good overall. Next up, we've got my Xingqiu. Now, he is most of the time on Favonius. Very, very, very often, I end up having more than one character that wants Favonius, and when that's the case, because I only have one, he either goes to Sack Sword, or if he's in a double Hydro team, sometimes I'll put him on Lion's Roar. He is usually using this Flower, this Feather. Often he uses this Sands, or this one, or this one, basically depending on what team. We have our Hydro, interchangeable between these two very often. Usually I think he's on this Circlet, which gives him these overall stats. Nothing crazy, but also not terrible. After that, we actually start getting into very often sharing sets. So most of the time, I don't actually play all of my characters that want Emblem at the same time. Beidou ends up sharing a lot of her artifacts with Xiangling or Yelan. And also, very often, what I end up doing is I actually somewhat often end up using my Xingqiu on a Noblesse set instead of Emblem, which not only, well, sometimes Noblesse is better than Emblem on him, but also it liberates my Emblem artifact for someone else. And then finally, we have the last character that I often use on Emblem, which is Child. And yeah, I actually do use Child on Emblem most of the time. The main reason for that is because he's kind of just good on Emblem. Emblem is one of the possible sets for him. His best set is generally Heart of Depth, but when it's the best set, it's not the best set by much. But also, sometimes it's just not the best set. Because the way that Child's damage profile is, like, separated is you have, like, about 30 to 40 from his burst, then 20-ish from his normals, and then 30-ish from his charge attacks, and then the rest from his E, like from his Riptides. But the thing is, the burst is the first thing that happens, so if the enemies die before you get through all of your attacks, then your burst starts becoming more and more of your damage, which increases the value of 2-piece sets with Noblesse, but it also increases the value of Emblem. I don't have a good 4-piece Heart of Depth, and on top of that, my 2-piece sets aren't that great either, so very, very often what I end up doing is I just put them on Emblem. So generally, Raiden goes with an off-piece Feather. When I'm using Dragon's Bane, I get to 1,072 Elemental Mastery, which as of the time of this recording is on a website where people can submit their builds. The highest amount of EM that a Raiden on 4-piece Gilded Dream has. Now obviously, I've talked about how I'm currently farming the flop set, and the main reason for that is so that I can change her to a flop set. I still haven't found a flop goblet, which means that if I swap to flop, then I won't be able to use this anymore because my off piece has to be the goblet. And then at that point, my EM numbers aren't as impressive anymore, and I think that's cringe. So for now, we just keep farming the domain. A lot of these artifacts are interchangeable though, especially these two, because when you play EM Raiden in Hyperbloom teams, you don't need crit at all. Like, yeah, crit increases your damage because if it crits, it's either more crit rate or more crit damage. Like, that increases your damage. But it doesn't increase most of your damage, because most of your damage is Hyperloom, which doesn't, unless Nahida C2, and even with Nahida C2, isn't affected by crit chance. So these artifacts can basically be changed if I end up playing other characters that want gilded EM sets, but that do more damage themselves if I end up using Cyno, for example, which doesn't happen too often because I don't like Cyno that much, and even when I play him, generally I play him more in Aggravate stuff than in Hyper Bloom stuff. Or if I play characters that have Fav. Speaking of which, another one of the characters that I play quite a bit is Razor. There's a few options for flowers, but generally he uses this one because it has a good amount of EM and having enough crit rate to proc Fav reliably. This, for the feather, I often like kind of just, Sometimes I just use this one just because it has of EM. Usually I end up using this sense, which means that when I'm playing Razor, I swap right into one of these. I also use this one because it's my EM hat with the most crit. And then for this, generally I end up using this one, I believe. Right? I talked about proccing Fav, so he's often on Fav, and this is how I play him. We get a bunch of EM. This is the build that Razor is usually on when I play him in transformative teams, right? It's Thundering Fury, so it's Razor, Bennett, Nahida or DMC, and then Xingqiu. And when I do that, I have Bennett on Instructor and Sapwood Blade. My Sapwood Blade is R4, so it's 105 EM. Instructor is 120, so that's 225 EM that I gain from that. If I play him with Nahida, that's another 250. Generally not actually 250, because I don't actually have 1,000 on most, but about 250. So he starts getting upwards of like 1,200 to 1,300 EM. Gets a bunch of Burgeon damage. That's pretty cool. And then, finally, we have Thoma, who I would put on Keqing Crossbeer if I had it, but I do not. So he is on Favonius. Now, I basically never play all three of them at once though, because Raiden doesn't work in teams with Thoma or Razor, and neither does Thoma work with team with Razor or Raiden, or Razor with team with Thoma or Raiden, right? Like I'm fine with just those two sets, but sometimes I'm lazy, so I don't want to have to redo them. So generally, if that's the case, I'm gonna just put my Thoma on a whatever EM set. Generally give him a little bit of crit, just enough to be able to proc the Fav, but being a little bit less built around it than Razor, right? He's generally like on this, I think. I guess it's this. Yeah. And that kind of does it for the gilded stuff. I don't have a good gilded like crit set, so I don't really use it on characters like Fischl or stuff like that in Aggravate teams. But yeah. Now let's take a look at the VV stuff. Generally, I have like 2.5 EM sets. I've talked about sometimes different characters needing the Fav. Very often, that's going to be Kazuha. So usually my Kazuha is on this build with Favonius. He uses most often an offset for the flower because I have this piece that has a lot of EM and a lot of ER and some crit. And I don't have anything nearly as good on VV itself. Often he uses this one, this one, this one, and then... So this is my Kazuha set. I end up with a total of 31% crit rate, which is decent enough to get somewhat good consistency from the Fav. Enough ER, for sure. A little bit of flexibility in the artifacts as well. And a total of around 838 EM. Now, when I play him in teams where he doesn't need quite as much ER, and in teams where the Fav particles aren't as useful in the rest of the team, so for example, if you're looking at Keqing Aggravate teams, or TF Kazuha teams, then sometimes I'll put him on Iron Sting, and effectively don't really change anything other than maybe changing this one to a flower that has a bit more EM, like my Deepwood one, or this one. Sometimes he's also just on sack if I'm in chambers where like getting the second E in a row helps your grouping be more consistent. Next up is Sucrose. Now, Sucrose is a little bit less difficult with her artifacts because she doesn't need to like get to a certain amount of EM to proc Fav reliably because you don't really play Fav on her. You either generally play Sac Frag or TTDS. And because she gets most of her value without having to use her burst, then if you don't have enough ER on her, it's not really the end of the world. It's not ideal, but, you know, there are worse things. Okay, so generally she has this. I believe this. Actually, I think usually she's on this one. This. I mean, usually she's on this one, but I guess I should probably put her on the one I just got that has a little bit more ER. I might as well. So around 920 EM and a total of 160-ish ER. My Venti, like the optimal Venti build depends a lot on what you're doing and what team he's in. Generally, I have him on an ADC build with a decent amount of EM substats so that he's always like fine and I don't have to worry about his build too much, which means I think I'll use this. Is it this one? I believe so. Most of the time he's on this one, but I have this one available and ready to go if I need to. He's also on this and on this. I forgot which one my off piece was. I guess it's this one, right? which leaves him at a total of like about 60 to 120 ratio, a decent amount of attack, but also a decent amount of EM. I've got some really good artifacts like this one. That's just very, very good for him, right? It's 8 roller goblet of only stats he likes. And I got this fucking abomination as well. And then finally, Xiao. Now you might be thinking, but what do you mean, Jeff? Why would you go 4VV on Xiao? Well, I really like playing Xiao in teams where 4VV is actually good on him. So it's either generally going to be in Dendro teams where you play solid stuff and I just take Kazuha's artifacts, put them on Xiao and give him 5 lens. Or sometimes I'll play him in like National, go for an ADC set with 5 lens. Or sometimes just play him in a Xiao team where you actually have a support that deals damage like Yelan, and it becomes like actually a decent option to go for him, even like on normal stats, normal weapons, but just with a 4VV. And my 4VV for him is actually pretty decent. Usually I believe it's this one. I think it's this one. My feather is my worst artifact on him, unfortunately. I generally want to put him on this, which means that I put the EM1 on Venti. I'll give him this animal goblet, which is pretty good as it turns out. And I can go offset on the circlet, which generally is just going to be a crit damage one. But if I'm going on Fab, sometimes it can be a crit rate one instead. Usually I think he's on the Blizzard Stringer one. Although maybe he should be on this one instead, honestly. He probably should be, yeah. Or this one if I need a bit more ER. Alright, so these are my total stats. So pretty solid overall, nothing crazy, but pretty decent nonetheless. Now next up, let's get to the Cryo ones, the Blizzard Stringer ones. So my K is double crowned. Usually I put him on Blackcliff Longsword because if I play him in freeze teams, I don't get the passive from this. Sometimes I'll put him in Fab if he's solo Cryo. So I use generally this flower that doesn't look that great from crit value, but has a lot of attack, so it's still a pretty solid piece. This feather, this sands, either this one or one of these two, depending on what team I end up playing him in. For now, let's go for this. This is the circlet that I use on him, which leaves him at like a decent overall stats. Nothing crazy, but nothing great either. And then Rosaria just gets the scraps, but most of the time if I end up playing both of them, Rosaria's on noblesse. So my Albedo is the only character that uses my Husk set, which means that usually he just stays on his build and never changes. So I've got this flower that's pretty solid, this feather that has a lot of defense percent and it's actually very good, this which is probably my most underwhelming piece but it's still somewhat decent, this one which he usually uses, and finally my goblet, which is actually very, very good. And so this is his overall stats. Once the Husk passive kicks in, he's at slightly over 3,000 defense. Next up, let's talk about Crimson Witch. My Crimson Witch set is pretty strong. I have this flower that's very good on Hutao, feather that's pretty good on everyone, and then I have this circlet that's very good on Hutao. And then that's kind of it for my good pieces. So I end up either using this, if I don't really like that much, because I don't have an HP or an EM sense, and then going offset on the sense, for example, either this if I want the EM, or this one that I just recently got, I believe yesterday. But yeah, usually I put her on Jadewing Spear, which puts her ratio around here. With this recently obtained artifact, I can now also just, instead of going 4-piece Crimson Witch, I can go 2-piece with Crimson Witch and Wanderers. And when I do that, she uses this one, which puts her ratio at 97 to 180, which is a very, very strong Hutao in terms of artifacts. I don't use Shimenawa's because I think Shimenawa's is garbage. I will never use it on anyone. I do not have a Shimenawa's farmed. If I end up using Crimson Witch Bennett instead, he's gonna yoink this, yoinks the goblet that I don't like too much, but whatever, yoinks this, and finally, generally goes for this off-piece, but sometimes you can also go for this one instead. That being said though, for now, I'll leave the Hutao with the pieces because Bennett is also very often used with Noblesse. So, when I go for my Noblesse Bennett build, he gets either this one for most ER, or this one just for overall damage. It kind of depends on who else needs Noblesse that I'm using at the time. Then he usually gets this one, because not too many others want it. It's either on him or on Xingqiu, this one. Otherwise, he can use this one as well. He is basically always on this, which is kind of a garbage one, but whatever. It has ER main stat, which is what we care about. When I leave him on his optimal noblesse build, I usually put him on this one, which is a goblet with 17 ER. But because very often I end up changing him between noblesse and instructor, usually I just give him this, which is a bit less ER, but it makes it so that when I change my artifacts, it takes less time. So I kind of just, I'm okay with it. And then finally, he gets this, I believe it's this one. But like I said, sometimes I swap him to instructor, and when I do, right, I have an instructor set leveled up for him, so around 10 ER on this. This one's a bit unfortunate, definitely could get some more, haven't been getting lucky. Stay on the 5-star for the sands, because you want a 5-star ER sands. I get this. Alright, and I'm still at 210 ER, which is not as much, not always going to be enough, but it's a pretty good amount for an instructor set, usually on Aquila. Although, sometimes with Razor, I'll put him on Sapwood, and that brings his ER up a little bit as well. I give her the set with the highest amount of crit rate that I can get with on my noblesse. This. I think this is the one I usually use. So I end up with a total of, when I put her on the Fab Lance, total of almost 50% crit, 210 ER. But yeah, so this is usually what I use. Noblesse isn't always the best set, but it's what I have for a defense set right now, and I don't want to bother doing like another set. Ayato can wear Glad, so he's gonna be who I use as an example. Usually, very often, he's on Alliance Roar, and when I put him on full Glad, this one, this. Most often I keep him on this because he's the only Hydro unit that I regularly put on TF, which means that this makes it so that I don't have as many artifacts to change, but I can also put him on this if I want to. Alright, which gives him a total decent amount of crit, considering it's not a crit weapon. On other characters, when I will go to Glad to something else, depending on what the to something else is, it would make like what I end up using different. Like for example, on Ningguang, I'd end up using this one as well as this one. On Xinyan, when I play her in Pyro teams, I'd often just do 2-piece Crimson Witch with like this one, or just this one and this one. But all in all, I've got a bunch of decent options for 2 Glad, 2 whatever. Nahida's weapon is almost always Fav, and then honestly, it kind of doesn't matter that much which set I end up going for. I have a bunch of options for basically every single artifact, but I don't have any that's like actually that insane, so it's kind of just like, oh, okay. And then I can offset on this, and whatever. Her build changes around every once in a while. And when it comes to Dendro main character, very similar, right? Also wants Fav, but often doesn't get it, so sometimes they'll just be on Sapwood. I usually give them a decent amount of crit rate just so that if I can use Fav, I don't have to change my builds around for it. So it's usually stuff like this. Is it this one? 9. Yeah, crit rate 22 ER. I think it's this one that I usually use. Alright, so I end up with a total of 232 ER, 65, 64 crit rate. And Collei just gets the scraps usually. Most of them, often I try to put her on Fav. This one, and then finally, the very last and most important part of my account is the TF. So, I most often play my Keqing with Harbinger. When I do that, I usually put her on, I believe, this. Unfortunately, I don't have a great crit damage goblet. And if I, crit damage circlet, sorry. If I go crit damage circlet, I have a really good ratio, but when I use my burst, I gain 15% crit, and I'm wasting a lot of it. So I have to go for something that's not quite as good, albeit, like, although it's still pretty good. Right, and I get this ratio. This is with the Harbinger active, right? She is currently above 90% health, but yeah. Fischl usually is using my Skyward Harp. Depending on what team I end up using, her gear can end up varying quite a bit, but like, baseline is kind of this one, something more like this, I guess, yeah. So this is like her baseline build, When I play Cyno, he just takes what Keqing would otherwise be taking. Like, they basically share their sets. Ayato also very often shares artifacts with Keqing. And that leaves us with the other TF characters that I use, which is Bennett, Furazan, and Kazuha. When I put Bennett on 4-piece TF, generally I kind of use a mix of similar pieces to the Keqing ones, although I have quite a bit of them, so I kind of just have... I can kind of just choose whatever I want. Something like this one, for this, Pyro one here. And then here it's kind of like up to what I feel like at a given time, but generally something like this maybe. Often changes the weapon to something like Iron Sting. Get a decent amount of VM for TF Bennett. Or sometimes I'll go for TF Kazuha or TF Furazan, who basically use the same artifacts. I like putting Furazan on Viridescent Hunt just because it like helps keep the enemies grouped. And I think it's just fun. But otherwise she'd be on something like Stringless. And then I just give her basically filter TF, sort by Elemental Mastery. And just take the highest one basically. Generally it's this, this, this. Again, right, I go offset, so sometimes it's gonna be this one, sometimes it's gonna be this one. Yeah, stuff like this. Get a decent amount of VM for that. And when I'm using Kazuha, I just give him this instead. If I started a new account now, I'd say that focusing your early efforts into the Gilded and Deepwood set helps you a lot because Dendro has a very high floor. It can get you to basically getting through Abyss earlier than the other sets. But yeah, so focus your artifact farming in that domain and then a little bit of it in the emblem domain. And honestly, that's kind of all you need now. But yeah. Oh yeah, another thing, I guess. If you have instructor pieces with ER on them, keep them. Keep them around, level them up. They're worth it. I guess I should leave you guys on some of the artifacts that I guess I haven't shown because they don't fit any, like, they're usually used as off pieces and such. That are very good. I mean, I guess I got this one. That's a very good off piece for aggravate stuff. But yeah, I really have shown most of them. I mean, I've got this that's very good on Child as an off piece. Very good off piece in general. Some physical goblets that are very good and that I don't use because they're physical goblets. I don't have them all anymore, but when Dendro came out, I got like 4 Dendro goblets in a row that rolled over 1,000 flat HP. And I lost hope for a while there. I also have 139 Xiao lanterns. True. And I still have my hunting traps. Wait, I have enough to go... Alright, I guess we're gonna do that then. But yeah, so that does it for the video. Thank you for watching. If you've got any questions that you'd like to know about my account, maybe I'll do a second part to this video where I basically just answer questions relating to my account. So you can leave those in the comments below. If I end up doing that, then I mean your questions will be answered there. So thanks again for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. Go check me out on Twitch. Leave a like. All of that good stuff. And I'll see you guys around. Bye, YouTube.